Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to our Democracy Day special programming here on Channels Television. At this point, we'll be taking a look at something else that concerns everybody and has assumed a major dimension in more recent times, and that is talking about security. COVID-19 has made it even more difficult or easier, depending on who you ask, to address the problems of security. But we have a good panel in-house here to take a look at this, starting from our Lagos studios here, where we're joined by a security expert. Of course, he's president of Transworld Securities Limited, Dr. Ona Ekomo. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you, Ladi.
Also sitting beside him is Colonel Yomi Dare, who is a retired Army officer. He's also a friend of the house. Thank you for being with us, Colonel
Thank you very much, and happy Democracy Day.
Happy Democracy Day to you too. From our Abuja studios, we are joined by the Chief of Defense Information, Major General John Enenche. Good evening, General. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sitting beside him is presidential spokesman, Senior Special Advisor to the President in Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina. Mr. Adesina, of course, also a friend of the House. Thank you for your time on this Democracy Day.
Thank you.
Lady, I was going to start off with Dr. Ona, intentionally so, because security is your thing, and you've been in it for quite a while. Do Nigerians, those who come to you, who talk to you about their security needs, do they feel any safer than they did 21 years ago, or in the last 1 year even? Do people feel safer right now?
It's not a simple yes or no answer. You have to look at the time, because time is an explicit variable in analyzing a level of safety, or in fact, perhaps the inverse form of your question, or the obverse side of your question is, what is the performance? I think you have to look at what are we talking about? We're talking about robberies. Are we talking about insurgency? Are we talking about banditry, which I call terrorism? What is it really that we're talking about? Or is it just a feeling of how safe the people feel? For example, when we had, Ladi talked about COVID here just now. When we had the full lockdown here in Lagos, we had the Awawa boys marching through the streets, the million boy gangs marching through the street. And now, more recently, even in today's paper, I did an interview where we were talking about traffic robberies. We're talking about, the kinds of things, or even now, more recently, with the rape of Uwa in Benin. So these are all different security risks, perhaps even threats also. So we have to say, what is it that Nigerians want? So what about kidnapping? Is it more prevalent now, or is it on the low side? Because really, you can't abolish all crimes. You can't make everybody safe, but they can feel more safe or less safe. So it's a more or less issue. And I think right now, it depends. If you are in Maiduguri, you will probably be feeling less safe right now because of more recent incidents, or even Sokoto, Katsina, Zamfara. You will probably also be feeling less safe in certain local governments. Southern Kaduna, you also be feeling less safe. But here in Lagos, the relaxation of the COVID has kind of eased up things. But then you have the traffic issues where people close late, they are going home, they are attacked in traffic. So it depends on how the authorities assess these security threats and address them. That is what ends up as service to the public, whether they feel more safe or less safe. So I think I'll just say it's a mixed bag. It depends on what you are looking at.
Okay, let's go to our Abuja studios. Let me put that question to Mr. Femi Adesina. You're the president's spokesperson, but you also move around a lot, and you're also privy to most of the reports that Dr. Ekomo and others would be making reference to. Let me put Ijeoma's question to you, but slightly differently. In the last 5 years, from 2015 to now, and then again in the last 1 year, how have you assessed the security situation?
Yeah, thank you. I'll say yes, in the last 5 years, there have been advances in the security situation, a lot of advances. We have suffered some reversals, which are quite sad, which are regrettable, but then there have been a lot of advances. 5 years ago, you had bombings everywhere, including in Abuja. You had in Northeast, you had in Northwest, you had in North Central. But today is not the situation. You still have pockets of attacks in different parts of the country, but they are not as concerted and concentrated as we had 5 years ago. So now, compared to 5 years ago, there is a wide difference.
How about from a year ago?
Yes, that's why I said there are advances and there are some reversals. But if you want to look at the average, the advances far outweigh the reversals. When the reversals come, they are quite bad and sad, and they are dampeners. But then, if you compare the advances and the reversals, you will see that the advances far outweigh the reversals.
Okay, Major General Leche, let me put it to you then, because there's a reason I asked that security question at the beginning. I know Mr. Additional has talked about there have been some advances and reversals, but if you look at the World Report for 2020, we're not scored very high in terms of where our security is now. And the specific area they're talking about is conduct of the security forces and abuses, etc. Where are we on that right now in terms of getting the men and women of the force to improve on civil-military relations, etc., so that people actually do feel a bit more safe, not just in terms of where they are, but in the prosecution of insurgency, etc.?
Good. What I want to understand you, let us put it clear. What you mean by civil-military relations. When we talk about civil-military relations, there are two dimensions of it, so many dimensions, but two main ones. What are you doing with the public? How are you relating with them? Vis-a-vis international human rights laws and international humanitarian laws, guided by extant conventions such as laws of armed conflict, and then how you deal with civilians. First and foremost, in the area of civil-military relations, the normal thing is that you relate with them with the best practices as established by extant regulations and laws, like I said. And I tell you that the armed forces of Nigeria, cutting across the services, Nigerian Army, Navy, and the Air Force, they have done wonderfully well in that regard. Now, if you talk about the conflict areas, particularly in the Northeast, are we following the rules of engagement? Are we guided by the laws of armed conflict? Are we following all the extant regulations of how to handle civilians in conflict and then as people that surrender? I will tell you yes, because let us not forget about propaganda of our common enemy, in this case, the terrorists, the bandits, as the case may be, and then other criminals. They will want to make a mountain out of a mole. Like, for instance, some of the stories that came out, the reports, so-called reports, by some international organizations. You just pick one person who was not properly profiled, who we are not even sure whether he was one of the ex-combatants or one of those that surrendered, or one of those that maybe in the course of the fog of war, fog of the conflict, was one of those arrested and then profiled before being released, and then you say the person claimed to have been maltreated. What I can say here is that from our training and best practice, and we collaborate in addition with other organizations. You have the Red Cross, you have the United Nations reps and other people in the theaters of operations, particularly in the Northeast. So I would say that to a large extent, we are guided by these regulations, and our officers and men in the fronts, they respect the rules of the game. So I would say that, like you said, in the last 1 year, all those reports, if you subject them to forensic analysis, yes, I would say it is not correct. It is not a true picture, as it were. That does not mean that there are not a few infractions here and there, of which we are handled appropriately. You know that we have human right desks in the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, and all the theaters of operation. And of course, they have handled these cases which were made public. For instance, the people maybe that had issues with people at various checkpoints and all, particularly the Air Force, where people, some chaps that infringed on the rights of civilians around the Maiduguri airport. It was made public, the punishment was made public. But the same thing with the Army, the theater command of Operation Lafia Adole. There was a standing court-martial that handled all those cases. So those are the ways that we have handled those cases. But majority of it, I can say that they were just propaganda of the enemy against the successes that we record in the Northeast. Particularly each time that you see that we are recording successes, they will come up with one story or the other, particularly to discourage our strategic partners, then the populace, and then those are troops in the front. So that is what I can tell you, that the truth on the ground is that we have measures in place to check. Yes, we are not saints. In every 12 there must be a Judas, of course, and then we have been doling out the appropriate sanctions against the troops or officers and men that fall short of the expectation.
All right, thank you, General Enenche. Well, at this point, I think it's important to highlight the fact that we did reach out to authorities of the Nigerian police force to be part of this discussion, but we didn't get any kind of a response, because the police, of course, is the frontline security agency when it comes to many of the crime forms that we're talking about. Now, Colonel Dari, one of the things that has been identified and which Dr. Ekomu talked about earlier is that the crimes, which ones do we want to talk about? There are various levels of crimes. The things we were dealing with 5 years ago are not those we're dealing with now. They were not the ones we were dealing with a year ago. Some have even pointed out that COVID has brought about some new forms of crime, because people are more contained in locations and therefore they're more susceptible. But looking forward, and I'm saying that because of our time, the strategies to be put in place to address some of these things, would you go along with those who say strengthening of security agencies should be the priority?
Ladi, thank you very much for this question. For me, this is somehow dicey. It is neither here nor there, because like he said, security is everybody's business. Okay? You and I, we have our part to play in security. So it's not just for the federal government agencies, that is security agencies alone, or the military. Okay? And I had all that Dr. Ekomu said, and which I quite agree. But one thing we must also look at here is that, our demography. Okay? When you look at, say, Ijoma mentioned 21 years ago. 21 years ago, look back, what was the population of this country? Mm-hmm. And it was a different kettle of fish. Today, who knows? Some people say we are 200 million, over 200 million. So we have fresh challenges. And even with technological advancement, so every day you have new challenges. Now, talking about the present situation, I think that a lot has to be done, not only strengthening the forces, okay? Not only strengthening the forces, you can buy all you care, you can buy everything, all the latest gadgets, but if the psyche of that person to operate these gadgets is not tuned in line with what is expected, or the expectation, then it will amount to naught. Okay? So why am I saying this? We have a myriad of problems in this country, and it cuts across. The leaders, they have their own part. The led, they have their own parts too. And right now, we are faced with a lot of security issues in this country. Is it the insurgent in the northeast that we want to talk about? The militancy in the Niger Delta? The kidnapping? Armed robbery? Is it the herdsmen and the crop farmers confrontation? So it's multifaceted and multidimensional. But right now, I think our military also, the way I see the military right now, it's on record. And I must really commend them that they're doing so much. But I think the military is somehow overwhelmed right now. And there's need, for even the federal government to re-strategize, because what is on the front burner right now, the major crisis we have, is the issue of the Boko Haram. We have been at this for almost a decade now. You see? So there's an axiom in the military that you know your enemy. You have to study your enemy. You have to know your enemy's intention. You have to know your enemy's habits. Okay? So one expects that by now, our military too should kind of know these enemies so well. Granted, this warfare is not a conventional one. It is a guerrilla, more or less a guerrilla type of warfare. But notwithstanding, I think there's need for us to re-strategize. Now, away from that, the general security situation. What do we have right now? There are laws have been put in place, but there's need to give teeth to these laws. It's not a situation whereby somebody has gone to steal billions and at the end of the day, he gets off the hook. He or she gets off the hook with a slap on the wrist or due to some technical reasons. And then another person has stolen a motorbike and is sent to jail for 7 years. So why am I saying this? We are fighting corruption. There's so much corruption. And this is part of the reason why the crime rate is on the increase. Because...
Okay, Kanodari, I'll come back to you, but I know you've said quite a bit, but I want to come to you, Major General Enenche, specifically because this Boko Haram war we've been talking about goes beyond this political dispensation. It's been on. But specifically now, what sort of challenge are you having at the moment? I know we've been talking about funding, etc. Is it an equipment issue? Because each time we hear they've been decimated and they've lost their capacity to launch attacks, even now in the COVID era, we see that it is still on. What would you say is the principal challenge that the armed forces is facing at the moment prosecuting this particular war?
Good. The principal challenge we have in prosecuting this war, not only in the Northeast, it cuts across North, West, and North Central, is the issue of getting credible information from the populace. And that is a spillover effect. A lot of people didn't know that we saw a couple of days ago, this week, in Maiduguri, around Maiduguri, and in Katsina State, in the Borno State and Katsina State, where about 81 were killed and then 40 others. The remote reason for those actions was that you gave our positions away to the military, and they use other excuses to bounce on them. And that has been the major challenge. If we had the cooperation from the general public, particularly from those communities and those localities, where those terrorists, criminals, and bandits operate from in sleeper cells and hibernations, we would have long before now completed the complete degradation.
So what you're saying is that there's no
strategy was to dominate, to decimate, which we completed as far back as September 2016, and then to dominate the area. After domination, then to occupy. All of them have their legs. So the major challenge that has been, by the beginning of this year, it was a bit overcome. But that is, like I said, that is the outcome of what we saw. When they started volunteering information, you could see that the rate of success at both fronts increased rapidly. At a point, I had to come out from March 20th to begin to give the figures. And as the advances were going, the clearance operations were going both from the ground forces and the airstrikes. It was based on human intelligence, information. And that was our greatest challenge, as it were, cutting across all the zones. So I will say that now you cannot run away from that. We studied how it happened in other climes in the world. I particularly studied Pakistan. It took them 25 years. After about 12 years, when the people started volunteering information, within 2 years, they were done with what we are seeing now. So
sorry, Major General, sorry to cut in.
We believe that by the time we overcome this,
sorry
the
to have
people are not
to
becoming more
cut in.
confident.
I'm just trying to find out from you now. So what you're saying is that right now, there is no hardware equipment challenge. There is no funding challenge. We are principally facing an information challenge.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
It's just information. I'm saying that, but because as a practitioner, I can say that with all due respect, vast in operations, you plan with what you have, what you are giving weight against your challenge. And I can say that in all modesty, what we have on ground, if not for the lack of information where they are particularly, can you imagine a situation whereby you just pass a place and before you come back, they plant an IED and people are there watching? Will you blame it on that you don't have equipment? Will you blame it that you don't have the men? The answer is purely no. Because if you have the information that these people planted this in, you have a way of clearing that place. So the major challenge, the truth of the matter is that it is about this information, giving us information. We had a lot of collaborators, and now we are at the stage of mopping up those collaborators.
Okay, General Nenche, I'm told that
Yes.
I'm told that we've run out of time, but I think we'll still be able to go around. No, that's fine. That's fine. We'll go around for a number of closing statements, starting again from Lagos here, and Dr. Ekomo, and then of course we'll take Mr. Adeshino, and then we'll end up with Colonel Dari. Dr. Ekomo.
Thank you, Ladi and Ms. Ijama, and my big brothers in Abuja. I think going back to the question you asked me at the beginning, do people feel more safe or less safe? What do I tell them? And I say it depends on where they are coming from, or where they live, or what their circumstances, and what specific threats we are looking at. So that's where it starts. You know, we have to look at the risk spectrum in our society, and then we need to do proper assessments of those risks where they lie, and then before we can proffer meaningful solutions to those risks, and then start implementing them. You know, so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a thing we have here. And we have to be very smart about it. So I think what the Nigerian Senate did recently when they had this Senate committee on security challenges, it was very useful. They brought in a lot of stakeholders, took hearings or held hearings, and then issued a report. And I think, I don't know what came out of that report, but I think I gave them something in that particular process, you know, such that I thought that is something that we'll be able to address, because that's what we are lacking really, risk map. So we need to be able to go out there and map those risks and then address them such that we can have a safer society. Without
At that point, Dr. Ekomo, let me put you on pause and go to Mr. Adeshino in our Abuja studios.
Yes, thank you. If you listen to the president most of the times when he talks about the three focal areas of the administration, the first one he talks about is securing the country. Then the next one usually is reviving the economy, and the third one is fighting corruption. On that first one, he keeps saying before you can efficiently manage a country or even a town or an organization, you have to secure it. So for this administration, security is number one, and it remains number one. Globally, you won't get to a time where you can sit back and you say everything is secure. You will continue to work on security. You will continue to be alert to security. So this administration will continue to make security of the country number one. Whether the challenge is insurgency, whether it's banditry, whether it's kidnapping, whether it's farmers admins clashes, whatever the challenge is, security will always be number one to the administration.
Let me give General Enenche a minute for your closing statement.
Yes, I want to appeal to the general public to take a look back from the first quarter of the year through to the second quarter and see the rate of successes we've recorded. Though it's modest, but I can say that compared to the last quarters, 2 quarters of last year, something happened very positively. And how did we achieve that? We have a very good level of cooperation from the populace, from the general public, particularly at the hotspots. So I'm appealing to them to continue to provide information to the security agencies, particularly the troops in the front line and those at the hotspots. And working together with them, we are going to achieve more than what we achieved. And before you know it, the graph will begin to drop, and we'll get to where we expect.
Thank you very much, General Enenche. Colonel Dari.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ladi. My parting words is going to be in twofold. I'd like to talk about security generally. On general security here, I think a lot needs to be done. You find out that lately I was discussing with some friends, and somebody gave a hint of how, some foreigners are managing our work permits or visas, residence visas into the country. They have an office in Abuja. Foreigners, I don't think that is good for us, even security-wise. So I think that's something that the federal government needs to look into and stop, because they have all their people doing that. That's one. Then another thing is that as we speak, I think the governors, they need to wake up and take charge, of the security of the states. I commend what is happening in the Southwest, just like the Southeast governors too are trying to rally themselves around, So it has gotten to that stage. We need to do that. That's for general security. Now on the insurgent front, now you see, I want to advise that, like the terrorists do. The terrorists, they thrive on propaganda, okay? They go, they use the media and all whatnot. Fine. We know that the armed forces, the Nigerian military, they've really tried. These guys are working, doing fantastic. But there's need for Enenche's office to release some of these clips. Let the public see these clips, okay? It will go a long way in forestalling and some confidence in their work. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Let me thank our guests. As always, time is never our friend when we have these discussions. Dr. Ekomu, Colonel Dari in our Lagos studios, General Enenche, and Mr. Adesina in our Abuja studios. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll take a final break, and when we come back, we'll go to the last segment, which ties all of this together. And